Hi, and welcome to the Miniforgetfulnesssunclub. Today, I want to talk about two different spells that use the exact same word: humility. In Season 2, Episode 9 of Avatar: The Last Airbender, Uncle Iroh makes a comment about humility to his nephew, Zuko. Zuko is struggling with shame, but he doesn't understand why he feels shame because he's also so proud. Uncle Iroh tells him pride is not the opposite of shame, and the only true antidote to shame is humility. Growing up Mormon, I heard a lot about humility, particularly in the context of how to be the ideal romantic partner. The church invests substantial effort into shaping young people's understanding of their role and purpose in life. How to be a good wife and mother was the kind of training I was put through frequently, and part of that training involved a specific understanding of humility, which I'll discuss further on. Secularly, I've also read and heard, in response to the question, what's an attractive trait in a partner, that humility is a common answer. That humble and Uncle Iroh's humble, I do not think are the same word. I think Uncle Iroh is really onto something with his version of humility. Shame and pride are not opposites, and when he says humility is shame's antidote, I think he could also mean that pride is what feeds shame. Pride is linked to identity. I like to think of it as a loyalty to a historical contingency that is then treated like a metaphysical reality. Or maybe I should say, whatever you are proud of, that portion of your identity is likely shaped by the accumulations of history's accidents and chances. But instead of seeing it like that, pride infuses this portion of your identity with a sense of natural intrinsic purpose. Pride creates an attachment to something conceptualized by chance and dresses it up as a version of a kind of divinity. But that is a nasty little trap, and people will use it on you to your own detriment. I think of pride like a spell other people will convince me to cast on myself, to my own detriment. Pride will bind your complex existence to an accumulation of chances that triggered a conceptualization of certain things that are worth being proud of and disguises it as a fundamental principle. People have complex existences. To be a person is to be unfathomably complex. Fun. But when that complexity deviates from what is proposed to be fundamental, simple, straightforward, natural, a person is likely to feel shame about themselves. If you inherit or are convinced of some kind of pride, and there's an element to that pride that supposes it's intrinsic or deserved or divine, when your complex existence deviates uncontrollably away from that and makes room for another possible way of thinking or feeling, even if unintentionally and only for a moment, then what? You get to feel like you've let yourself down. As an example, and as a warning, I want to discuss the concept of chastity. I want to bring your attention to the example of chastity as an example of pride being a spell other people will convince you to cast on yourself to your own detriment, because it has obvious effects, and significantly the effects are on people who deserve protection but instead get shame. You cannot control many of your own thoughts and feelings, and you definitely cannot control other people. Due to some, let's say, historical contingencies, many people, women and girls especially, are taught to feel a sense of pride in relation to their chastity, and conversely shame when that concept of chastity is ruined. They are taught to project this onto all other women and girls as well. Whether intentional or not, both the concept of chastity and a pride and a shame connected to chastity, those things make it very easy for sexual predators to assault people and get away with it. Think of it this way. If a young child is told over and over again, whether through metaphor, example, overheard conversation, or explicitly, that sexual purity is better and something to retain, and that to be chaste is something to be proud of, and unchaste something to be ashamed of, if that child is sexually assaulted, that child will feel shame. If chastity is proposed as something a person is responsible for controlling and retaining until some divine and natural contract allows them to be naked in front of one specific kind of person, then another person taking away that person's agency, which is what happens during sexual assaults, that victim is programmed already to be silent about the assault instead of willing to expose it. So, while this example might seem like a tangent from humility, I would like to reiterate that it is an example of an identity with a historical contingency that is treated as a metaphysical reality, upheld through a sense of either pride or shame, with extremely detrimental consequences to the people who uphold the sense of pride. Now let's get back to the core, shall we? Humility, as Uncle Iroh seems to conceptualize it, cannot support the certainty that anything in this complex experience is intrinsic or fundamental or natural. Therefore, humility cannot encompass anything that proposes to contain absolute knowledge and truth. This makes sense to me. Would Uncle Iroh assume he knows what's best for everyone on the planet? No. His character definitely seems to accept things as they are, and he works with them as they happen as best as he understands. Separating oneself from certainty, from sanctimony, creates the freedom to experience your uncontrollable complexity. As I've said before, and I will say again, people experience thoughts and feelings that they don't have control over all the time. This, of course, does not mean we act on all of our uncontrollable thoughts and feelings, because I do think actually we have a lot of control over how we respond to our thoughts and feelings. Fun. Imagine how much more you can see and understand of yourself if you're free to witness your own uncontrollability. When you're allowed to think and feel what the mystery gives you, without those thoughts and feelings being tied to some fundamental truth that they may or may not be contradicting, you can skip all the identity narrative and shame dodging and self-flagellation and just process yourself. You can begin meeting with a much less scared version of yourself. You can learn to recognize, invite, and get along with the parts of yourself that you prefer, because you're no longer yelling and screaming at every thought you have that isn't ordained by the pride spell, and the parts that you don't prefer are still recognized and cared for enough to not get out of control. And when I say you, I do mean me. That was Uncle Iroh's humility. The other humility is different. The other humility concerns itself with fitting in. And when I say fitting in, I mean that it is possible to do things that are not, by some means or another, socially encouraged. There are structures that put substantial effort into shaping how we are meant to understand our role and purpose in life. But please don't get too carried away thinking about that last part. Yes, it's true. Also, not everything is on purpose. Lots and lots of things are not on purpose. This fitting in kind of humility has a lot more in common with obedience and fear than acceptance. In churches and on dating websites, humility is more likely to mean dismiss yourself. Because if you accept yourself and explore your complexity, you might find out that you've been given a lot of fundamentals that are not fundamental to you at all. A person who has spent a lot of time accepting themselves and being kind to themselves and getting to know themselves is a person who is difficult to convince of any certain metaphysical reality or intrinsic natural way of things, because they have seen their own interior landscape and they know the color that you say the sky is was not the color they saw. Maybe your sky was that color, but again, if a person dismisses themselves, they're more likely to believe what they're told about that metaphysical, fundamental, natural way of things. People are easier to control if they don't understand themselves, if they don't accept themselves. This takes us to a threshold of mists and sphinxes and mirages. Here we have two humilities. One is self-erasure, and the other is kind of a cute little taste of enlightenment. Kind of fun. Also dramatic. I worded that dramatically. It's not that simple, please. If you remember one thing from anything, remember that it's not that simple. It is. What? Get back here. I wish I did have a simple answer for how to tell which humility is which easily and all the time. Sometimes it is easy to tell which is which. Sometimes it's really obvious that the humility you did or that someone wanted you to do was just complete disregard for yourself. Sometimes you have to retreat into your cave with pink ambient lighting and lots of LaCroix and really try to feel and think about whether the humility felt like acceptance or self-abandonment, or both or neither. And sometimes, after long hours of contemplation, it will have shifted into a very big nothing, and then you have to accept that you'll just never have a solid grasp of it and come out into the light of day with not an answer, but 'twas an experience. And with that, I will conclude my thoughts on humility. Please go on out into your own lives and have a good day. Notice something sparkly and free. Sunlight in a mud puddle, for example. Spring is a great time for those. My cat's green eyeballs, I think that's one I'll be appreciating. Moonlight on cold clouds. I'm open to getting emails about what free sparkly things you saw. They must be free though. So jewelry will be a no. Lots of things will be a no. Surprise me. I love to be surprised. And I do think it's likely a lot of you will have some surprising free sparkly things you've seen. Email is in the info section. Also, if you'd like, you can join my Patreon. I have a $1 tier, which is simply a support me tier. If you caught anything out of this, $1 could go a long way for me. And I also upload videos there, which are in my $6 tier. It's your choice. I appreciate you just being here. Please take care. I love you. Goodbye.